This week on Hometown Ghost Stories. Fall River, Massachusetts has quite a dark history, with its most infamous tale being the 1892 axe murders at the Borden House. But what many don't realize is that the trail of death and hauntings goes far beyond the Lizzie Borden House. Tonight we'll try to put as many pieces of this complicated and terrifying puzzle together as we dive into the history and hauntings of the Borden House, Maplecroft Mansion, Oak Grove Cemetery, and more. This is Hometown Ghost Stories, Fall River, Massachusetts.
Hometown Ghost Stories contains serious and often distressing events and is not intended for all audiences. Viewer discretion is advised.
Fall River, Massachusetts, 1996. It was an unusually cold November night as Carl and his wife Bonnie drove through the coastal town of Fall River. Not that cold nights were uncommon in November, especially in New England, but this particular evening was frigid. There was a new bed and breakfast in town that the couple planned to stay at. Carl spoke with Ronald, the owner, earlier that day, confirming the room for the night. "What exactly is this place called?" Bonnie asked. "Lizzie Bowen or Bowden or something like that," Carl responded. Bonnie perked up. "Lizzie Borden?" she asked excitedly. "Yeah, that's it. Why?" Carl asked. Bonnie just looked at him, dumbfounded. "You've really never heard of the Lizzie Borden case? Lizzie Borden took an axe, gave her mother 40 whacks. It was the biggest unsolved axe murder case of the last century." Carl just shrugged. "Sounds familiar, I guess," he conceded. "Sounds awful, though," he added. "Maybe we should find someplace else." "Not a chance," Bonnie quickly retorted. "Maybe we'll see a ghost." Carl wasn't a fan of the supernatural and didn't share the morbid curiosities his wife enjoyed, but it was late and cold, so he bit the bullet and pulled in. The house loomed tall and dark against the star-speckled backdrop of the Fall River night sky. It took on a menacing look now that Carl knew its history. He pulled the car around back and parked. They were met at the front door by a man and woman who introduced themselves as Ronald and Martha. Bonnie quickly and excitedly shook their hands, not even taking a moment to shut the door before bombarding them with questions about the house. Martha laughed and guided her into the parlor, answering as many questions as she could. Carl stood in the foyer with Ronald and collected the room key. He then gathered his wife and headed to the second floor to their room. Bonnie couldn't stop talking about the Lizzie Borden case and the prospect of seeing her ghost, or one of the other ghosts that apparently haunted this old house. Carl was becoming increasingly more anxious, but he didn't want to sour his wife's excitement. The room was set up to look just like it had in the 19th century, a detail that only added to Carl's discomfort. It was late, and they had a long drive ahead of them the next day, so the couple decided to go to bed. Bonnie told Carl not to wait up for her because she intended to stay awake in hopes of seeing a ghost. Nevertheless, she was snoring within minutes, and it was Carl who wouldn't be able to sleep. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the creaking and groaning of the old house. He heard an occasional footstep that he assumed were other guests above, or he hoped anyways. Eventually, he felt himself drifting off, but was awoken by the creaking sound of a door slowly opening. He looked over at the door to the hall to see it swinging carefully yet deliberately open. The doorway was dark, but there seemed to be a shadow of a person in the frame. The shadow moved closer. Carl was frozen in fear. The silhouette of a woman came into focus, and she was holding something in her hand. An axe, Carl thought to himself. He wanted to scream, but he couldn't move his mouth. He couldn't even breathe. The shadow woman lifted her arm to reveal she was in fact holding what looked like an axe, and slowly knocked all of the items on the dresser to the floor. They hit the floor with a loud crash. Bonnie kept on snoring, but the sound snapped Carl out of his state of temporary paralysis. He raised his arm up defensively as the shadow woman hefted the axe and swung it down, the blade slicing right through Carl's forearm and into his face. That's when he woke up screaming. Bonnie was shaking him, asking him if he was all right. Carl scanned the room and saw no shadow woman. A nightmare. Relief flooded over him, and he was able to stop shaking. He threw the covers off and stood up. Suddenly, his blood ran cold as he looked at the floor by the dresser. All of the items that had been on top were scattered about the floor, as if somebody had knocked them off. I'm Dave Wilkins, and this is Hometown Ghost Stories, the Lizzie Borden House. Fall River, Massachusetts is an historic mill city known for its textile industry and strong Portuguese-American heritage. Originally settled in the 17th century as part of Freetown, it became an independent town in 1803 and later a city in 1854. During the 19th century, Fall River thrived as a leading textile manufacturing hub, earning the nickname Spindle City. However, in the early 20th century, the city began to experience economic decline as textile mills moved south, where labor was cheaper and regulations were less strict. The Great Depression further devastated the industry, leading to widespread unemployment and hardship. While there was a brief resurgence during World War II due to military production, the post-war era saw continued mill closures. By the late 20th century, deindustrialization had left Fall River struggling with economic downturns, population loss, and urban decay. Despite these challenges, the city has worked to revitalize its economy through tourism, small businesses, and the historic preservation efforts. Attractions like Battleship Cove, its preserved textile mills, and the Lizzie Borden House, now a popular museum and bed and breakfast, have helped draw visitors, keeping Fall River's rich history alive.
It could be said that the hauntings of Fall River begin and then end at Oak Grove Cemetery. Originally starting out as 47 acres when established in 1855, the cemetery has grown to the size of 120 acres and is the eternal home to over 53,000 people currently. In its 170 years, the stories of hauntings at Oak Grove have rang throughout the city. It's believed that one of the most prominent ghosts roaming amongst the headstones was the victim of a murder. However, maybe not the one you're thinking about. On December 21st, 1832, while walking his property, John Durfee found a dead woman hanging from a stackpole. The police would arrive and quickly figure out that it was the body of Sarah Cornell, and it was at first ruled that she had taken her own life. This didn't sit well with many, though. Sarah appeared beaten, and after searching her possessions, a note was found. That note read, "If I should be missing, inquire of the Reverend Mr. Avery of Bristol. He will know where I am. December 20th. Signed, Sarah M. Cornell." Already buried, Sarah would be exhumed to study her body further. Sarah had lived a hard life, disowned from her family for marrying a man that her father didn't approve of. After that husband left her, she had to turn to hard work and theft to provide for her children. She would then meet a reverend by the name of Ephraim Avery and would have a relationship with him in which she would become pregnant. Mr. Avery would become the prime suspect in the murder of Sarah Cornell. During the trial, the state will rely on testimony from 3 women, Mariba, Ruth, and Susanna, all with the last name of Borden, to give testimony that marks and bruises on the body of Sarah were not self-inflicted. A wild trial would rage on, and on June 2nd, Mr. Avery would be found not guilty. The community would shun him, though, and he would move to Pittsfield, Ohio, to live out his days. Sarah would be exhumed a second time in 1868 and moved to Oak Grove Cemetery. Perhaps her grave being disturbed so many times has caused her to haunt the grounds of Oak Grove. The feeling of melancholy and the sounds of weeping have been reported when people are near the grave of Sarah. Throughout the cemetery for over a century, a mysterious woman with a very detailed description has also been seen by many visitors. This woman has been described as wearing a black Victorian dress. She's more short than tall and has pale blue eyes. She's never been seen actually entering the cemetery, but she more so just appears. And anyone brave enough to call out to her have said that she will turn, look up, and then quickly rush away, disappearing between headstones. A caretaker has reported chasing the figure for over 200 yards while he was in a golf cart, but noted that he was never able to make up any ground before she simply vanished. Perhaps this is the spirit of Sarah Cornell, or maybe it's the spirit of another more prominent figure that has also been laid to rest at Oak Grove Cemetery.
The city of Fall River would change forever with regard to its infamy on August 4th, 1892. The house at 230 2nd Street was owned by a man named Andrew Borden, a local businessman who lived with his wife Abby and his 2 adult daughters, Emma and Lisbeth. On the morning of August 4th, everything started out like a normal day at the Borden house. Andrew and Abby Borden had breakfast with Bridget Sullivan, the maid, and John Morse, Andrew's brother-in-law from a past marriage, who stayed over the previous night. John was the brother of Andrew's first wife Sarah, Lizzie and Emma's mother, making John Lizzie and Emma's uncle. Emma had been staying at a friend's house in Fairhaven, 15 or so miles away, and Lizzie didn't attend breakfast, opting to remain in her bedroom. After breakfast, John left to go visit other relatives in another part of town, and Bridget was sent outside to wash the windows. Andrew left the house to run to the bank and to the post office, while Abby went upstairs to clean the guest room where John Morse had stayed the prior night. While Abby was in the guest bedroom, somebody approached her and struck her in the head with an axe. She was spun around and landed face first on the floor next to the bed, and the attacker struck her an additional 18 times, leaving her dead where she lay. A little over an hour later, Andrew returned home from running his errands to find the front door jammed. Bridget noticed him struggling and helped him unjam it. Andrew, who was exhausted from the heat, found Lizzie standing inside and wondered why she didn't help him when she heard him struggling with the door. Not putting much thought into it, he decided to lie down on the living room couch to rest. At around 11 a.m., somebody approached Andrew while he was asleep and struck him in the face with an axe 10 or 11 times, mutilating his face. 10 to 15 minutes later, Lizzie discovered the body on the couch and ran out of the house calling to Bridget that her father was dead. Bridget and a neighbor named Adelaide Churchill rushed into the house to confirm what Lizzie had claimed and then sent for the family doctor and authorities. When asked about Abby's whereabouts, Lizzie repeated that she thought that Abby had gone out, though her body was later discovered upstairs. After the bodies of Andrew and Abby Borden were discovered, Lizzie Borden's actions and behavior led to growing suspicion. Lizzie gave a series of inconsistent statements to the police. First, she claimed that Abby had left the house earlier, but the body of Abby was found upstairs. She also stated that she had been in the barn at the time of the murders, which was later questioned by investigators due to nobody having seen her there. On August 11, 1892, Lizzie was formally arrested after a grand jury indictment. She was charged with the murders of her father and stepmother. She spent 10 days in jail before being released on $50,000 bail, an amount that's equivalent to over $1 million today. Lizzie's trial began in June of 1893, and she was acquitted of all charges after a dramatic trial that lasted several weeks. Despite her acquittal, Lizzie's behavior, combined with a lack of physical and circumstantial evidence, continued to fuel public speculation about her guilt, and the case remains one of the most famous unsolved murders in American history. The house is now known to be one of the most haunted in America, landing on nearly every top 10 list. It's most famously believed to be haunted by the ghost of Abby. Many times, an older woman is seen wandering the house. Abby is mostly seen in the second-floor hallway and guest room. The house is not surprisingly also believed to be haunted by the ghost of Andrew Borden. Some believe his spirit to be malignant, others believe he's just grumpy. Tour guides have claimed that Andrew's ghost has punched them in the back while walking through the house, and many people will leave money in the dresser in Andrew's room to keep his spirit at bay. The idea behind this is that Andrew was known to be a miser with his money. He was wealthy, but chose to live below his means, which frustrated his daughters. Many also believe the house is haunted by the ghost of Lizzie Borden herself. Guests staying in the room besides hers wake at night. It's subtle, but undeniable. The sound of a woman crying on the other side of the wall. One couple who stayed the night had a strange experience. The wife had awoken around 3 a.m. She had fallen asleep in the parlor and woke up confused. She looked around the dark room and noticed movement by the grand staircase through the parlor door. Pressed against the wall was an odd shadow stretched all the way up the stairs. It didn't match the other shadows or items blocking the lamplight, and the shadow was moving, slowly swaying back and forth before rolling up the stairs, soundlessly moving up each step before disappearing at the top. The woman believes it was the ghost of Lizzie, though there's no reason to think it couldn't have been the ghost of Abby or even Andrew. Aside from the ghosts of the Bordens, other spirits are also said to haunt the house. Spectral cats have been seen roaming the house as well as chairs rocking on their own. There are also the ghosts of children that haunt this house, particularly on the 3rd floor. Guests have reported hearing children's laughter and giggling, as well as seeing objects moving around on their own, such as marbles rolling and coat hangers jostling. Although no children lived in the house at the time of the murders, many believe they are the ghosts of the 2 children who were murdered next door in 1848. Next door to the Borden house sits a coffee shop called Miss Lizzie's Coffee, but before it was a coffee shop, it was part of the original Borden estate. It was the home of Lizzie's great-uncle Ladwick Borden and his second wife, Eliza Darling Borden. Eliza and Ladwick had both been married before. In Eliza's previous marriage, she had 2 children, one of which, George Washington Darling, died at the age of 7 after running into the street and being trampled by a horse. Her first husband had passed away that same year. Eliza and Ladwick had 3 children together in very rapid succession: Maria, Eliza Ann, and Huldah, aged 3, 2, and 6 months. During a fit of what is now expected to be postpartum depression, she one by one drowned each child in the cistern of the basement of the home, although Maria, the oldest child, managed to escape and run for help. By the time help arrived, however, the 2 younger children were found dead, and Eliza was found to have crawled over to the chimney where she sliced her own throat with a straight razor and bled to death. Maria survived and grew up to raise a family of her own. When the Lizzie Borden trial was going on, prosecutors referenced the Eliza Borden case to establish a trend of mania among the women of the Borden family, but Maria put that accusation to rest, reminding everyone that her mother was a Borden only by marriage, and whatever madness plagued her mother died with her.
Lizzie Borden's Maplecroft mansion. The grand old building in Fall River, Massachusetts looks like something out of a postcard. Charming, stately, the kind of place you'd imagine sipping tea on a wraparound porch. But step inside and the vibe shifts. Acquitted of hacking her father and stepmother to death with a hatchet, Lizzie didn't skip town like you'd expect. Nope, she doubled down, staying put in Fall River for another 35 years. She hasn't called Maplecroft home in nearly a century, but she's clearly not ready to go. She lived with her sister Emma for a dozen of those years, and then alone until her death in 1927. Where exactly she died in the house, no one's sure. She had not 1 but 2 bedrooms, and if that wasn't enough, her wake went down right in the parlor. After the acquittal, she didn't slink away in shame, she reinvented herself. Changed her name to Lizbeth, probably figuring it might help dodge the whispers, it didn't, and moved off into the fancy part of town, where she always wanted to live her entire life. This was it, the life she and Emma had always dreamed of. 7 bedrooms, 3.5 baths, a proper place for a woman of means. But money doesn't buy acceptance. The town of Fall River never forgave Lizzie. She had a few friends, sure, and threw the occasional themed party, but for the most part, she lived in quiet exile. The sisters coexisted for 12 years until one day, they didn't. a rift formed. Deep and irreparable, Emma packed up and left for New Hampshire. They never spoke again. No one knows for sure why. Some whisper it was over a man, some say Emma didn't approve of Lizzie's choice of lowly theater group friends, and some say it was something darker. Lizzie died at 66, pneumonia taking her down in the very house she had poured her soul into. Her wake was held in the parlor, and in one last act of defiance, she supposedly had her guest list prepared in advance, only for the funeral to be held on a completely different day. A final joke at the expense of those who snubbed her in life? Maybe. Years later, Maplecroft changed hands, eventually landing with the Silva family. Frank Silva, just 9 years old at the time, grew up dodging kids who chanted that creepy nursery rhyme about Lizzie and her axe. The family even had a pet monkey, a mischievous little fellow named Rab, who once stopped traffic by running into the street, halting a car carrying none other than Frank's father and a bishop, because why not? Frank's grandfather died in the Maplecroft home in 1953, possibly in the very same room where Lizzie drew her last breath. Maybe that lingering presence people feel inside of Maplecroft isn't just Lizzie. Maybe it's him too. And then there's Emma. The same day Lizzie died, Emma fell and broke her hip. 9 days later, she was dead from complications. Coincidence? Maybe. And some theorize that maybe it was Lizzie making sure that her sister took their secrets to the grave. People claim to see both sisters' spirits roaming Maplecroft. According to psychic, clairvoyant, and medium Glenn Tezza, who visited Maplecroft, quote, "There was a lot of activity. I was really surprised. I didn't expect anything paranormal." Tezza swears he saw orbs of light swirling in the front parlor, like a snowstorm, he says. And then, like stepping into some kind of ghostly time warp, he found himself in the middle of a party at Maplecroft, a party from over 100 years ago. The room was packed with spirits, some familiar, some complete strangers who, by the looks of it, were not thrilled to have an uninvited guest. And then, there was Lizzie. The parlor had transformed into an Easter-themed soiree, some kind of charity event according to Tezza. Outside, kids were hunting for Easter eggs, completely unaware of the ghostly spectacle inside. A pianist played in the corner, while well-dressed guests, some looking suspiciously like actors from another era, chatted amongst themselves. Oh, and Lizzie's little dogs were there too. Quote, "When Emma saw me, she left the room. Emma wasn't a friendly character. Up on the 3rd floor, in a cramped little room thought to have hosted seances back in Lizzie's day, Tezza ran into 2 more ghosts. A stern-looking older gentleman and a woman, both apparently mediums. The man wasn't thrilled about being interrupted. Quote, he stood up, looked pissed off. That gave me the willies. I saw Lizzie in the hallway," Tezza said, wearing a deep purple satin dress. She looked just like she did when she was acquitted, but thinner, younger. And those eyes. He couldn't shake those eyes. A sharp, almost lavender gray, framed by little brown glasses. She smiled at me, he said. It was a very pleasant smile. Maplecroft was investigated by several paranormal teams, and even appeared on an episode of Kindred Spirits, where they believe they made contact with Lisbeth herself. Today, the building is privately owned, and we can only hope that one day it'll be open again for paranormal investigations, so we can truly find out what spirits still lurk at Maplecroft.
Our last stop was also our first stop. It's believed that the woman in black from earlier that haunts Oak Grove Cemetery could also be none other than Lizzie Borden. But she's not believed to be the only of the Bordens that haunt the family plot. Visitors report the feeling of being watched even when no one is there while visiting the Bordens' graves. Others have heard the sounds of disembodied cries and moans coming from the area as well. EVPs have captured responses of the name Lizzie and Borden, amongst other things, being said. One of the more terrifying encounters is that people have heard the sounds of blood-curdling screams while walking near the gravesite. Whether or not the spirit of Lizzie or the other Bordens are roaming Oak Grove, the story of the family's dark past isn't going anywhere. As long as people tell their tale, the Bordens will haunt Fall River, one way or another, forever.
What is up, folks, and welcome into Hometown Ghost Stories, episode number 153. We're covering the hauntings of Fall River, Massachusetts, and the Lizzie Borden House. I'm Jesse Wilkins. I'm joined by Rob Coakley. Hello, Rob.
So I'm very excited to cover this one. This is one we've been holding on to for quite a while. And in the spirit of things, I took a picture of my breakfast and I sent it to Dave this morning. And I think I wrote the first nursery rhyme that has been written in 120 years. And it was, Rob squeezed ketchup bold and proud on eggs and sausage. Dave cried out loud. But Rob just grinned and took a bite. His breakfast game was pure delight. Dave was very happy about it.
Serial killer behavior there, putting ketchup on your breakfast. We're also joined by Dave. Hello, Dave.
Hi, I will tell you that it ruined my day. So thank you for that.
Not the message, just the fact that Rob texted him this morning. That usually ruins our day pretty well. So this is a big episode. We got a lot to hop into. That was a bit of a longer video, but there was a lot to cover in Fall River. Most of it surrounding the Borden case and a couple other little stories that were mixed in there as well. So we figured we'd bring in some experts on the case. We were joined by the hosts of Two Girls, One Ghost, Sabrina and Corinne. And it's our honor to bring them on the show. Welcome in, ladies. How are you?
Hello. We're great. How are you?
Doing well. So listen to your episode on the Lizzie Borden case. I believe you guys did that with the Morbid crew, right?
We did, but
Yes.
we are not experts.
I know, that was very kind of you to say. We're definitely not experts, but I guess experts in terms of what happens when you do an overnight investigation there, because we did spend an entire night investigating the Lizzie Borden house.
Which is very brave of you. So nicely done. We did get the...
Well, it's easier when you're in a group of four.
Yeah.
It's a little less scary.
We definitely did not go to the bathroom by ourselves during the investigation.
That's... better safe than sorry. So,
Yeah, exactly.
We also visited the Lizzie Borden house. We haven't done an investigation yet, which is why we wanted to make sure that we brought in some folks who did do some investigations there. So without further ado, like I was saying, I did listen to your episode. I thought it was pretty cool the way it was done. The editing on it was good, and the investigation was extremely interesting. You definitely made a lot of contact with the kids upstairs. I thought that was pretty cool. And
That was one of the coolest experiences we've had at a paranormal investigation to date.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting things about this investigation too was that the two people that we went with, Ash and Elena from Morbid, they'd previously gone to the Lizzie Borden house and done one of the group tours that was already set up. And there was such a difference between what they'd experienced then and what they experienced when they went with us. And I think one of the things that Sabrina and I have learned in our recent couple of years of investigating places is the energy that you bring into a house really changes what you experience when you're there.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
we went in obviously wanting to make contact, but basically kind of like set the scene to be like, we'll respect your boundaries if you respect ours, and kind of went in being like, we're all friends here. And some of the spirits felt that, and others were pretty unhappy that we were there at all.
Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, I noticed. I did notice. So,
You noticed the spirits calling us sluts?
I did,
stupid
yeah.
sluts.
You seem to anger one male spirit in particular a lot there.
Yeah.
Where
Carl.
he wouldn't leave you alone about it.
Yep.
Real quick question. When you guys were staying there, I know you were doing a lot of investigating overnight and you had the contact in the kids' room. And I just asked this because, like we said, we went on the tour there. We're lucky enough to live like 30 minutes away from the house. So it was easy for us to go check out the house. But when we toured the house, and I've sort of noticed this as we go to different locations, I noticed it at the Oliver house in Middleborough when we did the Hinsdale house. But I'm noticing when I go to these haunted locations, certain areas I get a sort of a different feeling, and I still don't know how to describe it. I felt that in the kids' room when we went there, and I was wondering if that's the room you guys stayed in.
Interesting.
So, well,
We didn't sleep.
when you say stay,
Pretended to
We
sleep
didn't-
in.
I was the only one that slept, and that was because I was super pregnant. But we were moving from room to room, and we didn't sleep at all. So we like literally pulled an all-nighter to
Yeah.
investigate all night long. I think we left at 4:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
We had the house booked until 8, and the only reason we left was because there was kind of a lull in activity, and we felt like the spirits were like, "Okay, we've performed enough for you. Let's all move on." And we were trying to be respectful, and we were also tired, so we were like, "Okay, we'll leave." But no, there's definitely a change in energy throughout the house. So
Yeah, and I feel like like when we were there, it almost started right away for me because we got there before Ash and Elena, and we were just walking around and hadn't refamiliarized ourselves with the case. And I was standing by the couch in kind of the lounge area where Andrew, I later learned, was exactly where Andrew had been murdered. But I was standing there and I just started to get a pain in my head. And I was like, that's so weird. And then my eyes drift to the crime scene photo and I was like, oh my gosh, how strange. But then I feel like the other room where all of us felt a real shift in energy was the guest room where Abby was murdered.
Yeah. And that one was really interesting because the energy was different in terms, like you could smell perfume. It was like this floral perfume that wafted through and you just felt a lot of sadness. So I think in some of the other areas you felt fear or confusion or hurt, but specifically in her room there was just like this overwhelming feeling of mourning someone, of being so incredibly sad, of just like this heaviness of death, but it did feel like it was in a very female way.
That is interesting.
And yeah, we also had some equipment that we brought with us. So we were using Ghost Tube, like the app on your phone. We had an S-Box. We had
cat balls.
Yeah, the
REM
classic
pod.
Sounded like a
balls,
whole
the
bunch
REM
of REM
pod.
pods from what you guys had going on.
Yeah.
And then we were there for 5 hours before someone from the house came and gave us access to a couple more pieces of equipment. So we ended up with a thermal camera. And I know you guys have used this before too, but the music box that plays.
Yes.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
That's so creepy.
So creepy.
The worst, isn't it? Just the absolute
Oh my
worst.
gosh. Terrifying. But we had all of that equipment. And what was really interesting was not only did we physically feel an energy shift when we went from different room to room and we traversed 4 stories really because the basement and then the 3 stories of the house. But also the things that were coming across on the S-Box and through Ghost Tube, the language that was used and the EVPs that were collected were so incredibly specific to those rooms. It was undeniable.
Yeah.
So like in Abby's room, for example, we heard the word startled.
We heard closet because there's also a theory that someone was hiding in the closet while she was cleaning up the room. And we were like, is that Abby trying to validate that? Or is it just, reiterating a rumor about the murder?
It's possible. I do want to jump into the case a little bit. So let's go back to the investigation in a little while. First of all, 2 Girls, 1 Ghost. For those who aren't familiar with your show, tell us a little bit about yourselves and what you guys do.
We talk about the dead, but we have a podcast. We've been doing it for 7 years. We have 2 different types of episodes. So we'll do research on places and those come out on Sundays. We'll tell each other those stories. And then we read listener encounters every Thursday. And then we've been dabbling and dipping our toes into more investigations and doing episodes we call Haunted With and having guests on and trying new things in the paranormal realm.
Very cool. Do you have any, you don't have to say when, but do you have any upcoming investigations that you're looking forward to?
Well, we had one come out today, actually.
Oh, nice.
And that was of the Henry Derby House in Salem with Kaylin Moore of Heart Starts Pounding, which is on our YouTube channel if you want to watch it. That one was simultaneously like the most frustrating paranormal investigation, but by the end of it, like it was like we didn't have all the pieces, and then when we did the recording afterwards talking about the experience, it all came together in this way that blew our minds.
Yeah, it was almost like it was unique in that it felt like we were there to help a spirit with some unfinished business, but we didn't realize that when we were actually investigating. And only after, when reviewing the EVPs, stories from the owner, and some of the experiences that we had, did we realize just how clear the direction was from the spirits of the house.
Yeah, that is interesting. A lot of times you don't even realize that until post-production when you're able to actually slow down and go over some of the evidence that you've caught. We had that a lot with we did New Orleans recently, and we had this one location where we played blackjack with ghosts, and or we tried to
so
anyways.
Fun.
But then when we reviewed the footage, we realized that, because we had caught some, a little stuff here and there where it might have said hit or stand. But then when we reviewed the footage and slowed it down and really turned up the volume and we were able to listen, it sounded like almost every single communication that we got during that session had to do with blackjack, which was pretty cool. So a lot of times you don't realize what you got until afterwards when you actually review the footage, which makes sense.
Right.
You got to review
it's
the
wild.
footage.
They were
I do wanna
terrible
talk-
at blackjack, though. They wanted to hit on 19. It was pure chaos. Just
Yeah.
the worst blackjack players.
You need
of
to
all
listen
time.
to them. They can tell the future, I'm sure. They're seeing what's going to happen.
Or they can
so-
see the cards. They know what's going to
true.
come next.
No, because they busted every time they hit on
Yeah.
Oh.
19 or 20. So not great at blackjack. Maybe that's how they died. Who knows?
Sabotage.
Yeah,
Less risk when you're dead, right?
Absolutely. So we did cover a few other locations. We'll jump into those in a little bit, but I do want to touch more on the investigation. But we got to talk about the case a little bit here.
Yeah,
because
and
I
before,
thought a lot of-
before we do, real quick, and we just want to give a thank you to the Lizzie Borden House. We were talking with Shayna. She got us in there pretty quick to go do the tour. So the Lizzie Borden House has been really cool with us, and
Yeah, they were awesome.
yeah, the
They're
tour
really
was great.
awesome.
Rick was our guide.
Yeah.
He was fantastic.
Can I ask, what do you all think? Who do you think did it?
I have some theories.
We do
Yeah.
have some theories. I was super convinced that it was the brother-in-law for a while, and then I after I
Right.
really researched it, I don't know. I don't know if it was him. I don't think it was him personally who did it, but maybe he hired somebody as a hitman to do
Yeah,
it.
because how does he become so confused and lost in such a small downtown that he's been to many, many times?
Right.
That's
Yeah.
what.
Yeah,
Was
it
odd.
seems like this is one of those cases where as soon as you start to dial it on one person, you're like, oh, they're absolutely guilty. Obviously, the going theory
Right.
here is that it's
Yeah.
Lizzie. There's obviously the most circumstantial evidence against her, but
Right.
there's a lot of theories. I mean, we can let's go through.
but
a
she
few of
wants to
them.
know who you think it is, Jesse, not
I'll get to that in
what
a
the
bit.
theories are.
Okay, I'll go off the bat and say I think her and her sister were in on it. I think Lizzie did the deed, but I think Emma knew about it. I think they were both in on it. So,
But I also think that they were justified if they did, and we can
I
talk
agree.
about that later.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some theories
love
there
a good
too.
justified axe murder.
There's no way it was Lizzie, is what I'm going to say.
No
It's-
way it was
Oh.
Lizzie.
There's no way it was Lizzie, dude.
Okay, well, let's start with this then. If not Lizzie, then who?
All right. Well, let me finish my theory. I'm telling you, it's not Lizzie. There's 0% chance it was Lizzie. Clearly, it wasn't the uncle, which really leaves me with a limited amount of suspects. So, Sabrina, you're number one. I think it might have been you.
Can't rule it out.
Thank you.
She is known to time travel. So.
I am. And I am a bit evil, so thank you.
Yeah. So that's my number one at this point.
But honestly, where was Bridget? Where was Bridget the entire time?
She
Well,
was
and she
napping,
also-
and she spent 45 minutes cleaning one window. Nothing suspicious at all.
Not at all.
But also, let's remember that the Borden family would lock her away into her room. So she also was very mistreated. So there's motive there for Bridget.
Totally.
That's what we do with Dave until it's showtime, though. So I feel like that's
The
You're
creature
not
in the
supposed
closet.
to tell everyone.
That's why I made this episode so long.
More time on some time out of the closet. Hey. Anyways, so I think we can rule out that it was a stranger. Like this theory that it was just a madman walking around town. There's a bunch of reports of suspicious people around town. If you've been to Fall
Right.
River, there's still a lot of suspicious people around town. But the theory that it was a stranger who just happened to walk in and hack him to death just makes no sense. So
Yeah, especially the time difference between Abby's death and Andrew's. Like a random killer is not going to be like, oh, let me just hang out here and wait for another person to come home and then kill them too.
yeah, at minimum, he waited 90 minutes in between
Right.
the first murder and the second murder. So either he just hung out, hid inside the house, and just
Made a
happened to
sandwich.
be waiting for Andrew to come home, and hopefully he takes a nap. And
Right.
also in that time frame, he's also hoping that nobody discovers the dead body. So too many things would have been too perfect for him. He would have had to wait 90 minutes at least between the first murder and the second murder. He could have
Yeah.
left and came back as one theory, but then he's worried about what's he going to go out in the street and hang out covered in blood and then break
Right.
back into the house? Unlikely.
Or not covered in blood at all, because if Lizzie Borden did it, that's one detail.
Well, no, hang on. We'll get into that in a little bit. Let's start with the stranger theory. So he also would have
Yes,
had to
because I
know
need to
that-
debunk this when you're done. So continue.
Okay, he also would have had to know that when Mr. Borden did get home, he would take the back stairs, not the front stairs. So he didn't actually spot the dead body when he went upstairs, because he did go upstairs when he came home. He would have had to just know that Mr. Borden was going to go ahead and take a nap. He would have
Right.
also had to know that the maid was going to plan on taking a nap. And he would have had to just know that Lizzie was going to end up going into the barn for 20 or 30 minutes so he can commit this act without being seen, then escape in broad daylight with a ton of witnesses all over the street and get away with this crime. For what reason? That's the other thing. There's
Right.
no motive here. So one of the theories is that it might have been a thief who had broken into the house like a week earlier. Turns out that was most likely Lizzie, who used to try to get back at her dad by stealing items or posing that.
Yeah, because he was super frugal. Like they were like, I want money.
Yeah,
she
would also steal things from her sister though too. They kind of had like the sister.
Yeah, and she used to go around town and she would like steal items from shops, knowing that she'd be caught and knowing that the shop owner would just refer to her father, like, "Hey, Lizzie stole, $55 worth of stuff again. I'm going to need you to pay for that, and I won't go to the police," type stuff. And she was of the upper class, so she would get away with this kind of stuff. And it was just kind of always
sometimes
her way.
You just gotta do what you gotta do to feel alive.
Yeah.
She could have just been a kleptomaniac. I don't think there necessarily has to be like this underlying motive, like she was trying to get back at her father. Might have just been a klepto.
Possibly.
Right.
But I think too many things would have had to go too perfectly for this random, crazy stranger to get away with this crime.
I feel like we can all agree on that. Yeah.
Unless I think there's one caveat to this where like it could have been a stranger, but it could have been, Bridget and Emma and Lizzie were all in on something, hired a stranger to do this. And so that's why there were so many like perfectly pieced together parts.
So it could have been a hired hand. We'll get into that theory in a little bit. Rob, I'll let you poke holes in the stranger theory if you want to at this moment.
I'm going to debunk the 90-minute thing real quick. Well, I'm not going to completely debunk it.
Because it was actually closer to 2 hours?
No, because it was actually probably closer to 10 to 15 minutes because they did a recent study on this where they were judging the temperature in the room that Abby was killed and the one that Andrew was killed. And because it was 83 degrees in Fall River that day and the sun was beating in that room, in the shaded room of the parlor that he was killed in, the decomposition of Abby would have been faster. So we're taking 1890 science versus today's science, and they think that after they've run that test, it was probably closer to 10 to 15 minutes. The other thing that they really rely on is the stomach contents, which has never been an exact science because people digest foods between 30 to 120 minutes in difference. So that is also something that we're taking science from the 1890s and we're just sort of always taking their word for it rather than running new tests and stuff. So there are theories that it could have been 10 to 15 minutes instead of 90 minutes.
Well, and that makes sense when you go into the decomposition, because for anyone who hasn't been to the Lizzie Borden house, Andrew died on the first floor, but you walk probably halfway through the house to get to the room that he died in. There's only a couple windows there. It's in the back. There's other houses on each side that could shadow kind of like the first floor windows there. But where Abby died is upstairs. It's in the front of the house facing the street on a corner bedroom. So there is a lot more light and heat does rise. So that makes a lot of sense.
Okay. But even so, whether it's 10 to 15 minutes or 90 minutes to 2 hours, you still had all of these circumstances for a criminal to go in there, a crazy madman or a thief to go in there and commit these murders and then forget to steal anything. So it wasn't a robbery gone wrong. There was no motive.
It was personal. It felt very personal, especially the way they were killed. Like there was passion and anger
According
behind
to
it.
the autopsy and the doctors, they said that the first blow on either one of those victims would have been fatal. So there was no reason to hack them 11, 12, 20 more times.
Yeah.
But if it was a crazy madman who was just going in there doing crazy madman things, doesn't necessarily need all those things to line up the way you said it, Jesse. It could have just happened the way it happened. He went in to kill whoever. He axed Abby first and then made his way downstairs, happened to find a guy sleeping on the couch, whacked him. Lizzie could have just happened to have been out in the garage or whatever, and the maid could have just been outside and he could have just walked out and it worked out the way it worked out.
Sure. Why that house? Why in the middle of day? So I think if it was a madman, he would have done it at night. So there's less reason to get caught. There's witnesses all over the street.
If you're talking about a madman, you're talking about somebody who does things because he's crazy.
Yeah. You're trying to put logic into unlogical situations.
Did that one murder in Fall River and then
maybe he jumped on a train and went to Villisca.
Maybe. Yeah, that was actually one of the theories surrounding it was a John Morse, one of the theories, because he ended up moving out to, where is it, Iowa?
Yeah.
And when the Villisca axe murders happened, they had reached out to him. The local police were like, wait a second, maybe we should look into the guy that, just left the axe murder house and see if he has something to do with this axe murder. But it turns out he had a pretty good alibi because at the time of the Villisca murders, I believe he was dead, which is a decent alibi.
He'd been dead for 6 months at that point. But maybe.
Interesting.
Can't rule it out.
Bulletproof, some would say.
Right.
Well, whoever did it definitely had some passion behind the killings, because so one of the things that was unique about us going with Ash and Elena was that Elena has experience as an autopsy technician, and so she brought a lot of knowledge into kind of like exactly how the blows hit and at what angles and how someone could have been basically like axed to death. And Abby, the way that she was hit, it does make sense, the theory that someone could have been hiding in the closet first and waiting for her to come into the room, because the first blow was almost, yes, it was a blow that could have killed her, but it almost was like an incorrect blow. Like it hit the side of her temple, which could happen if your heart is racing, you're full of adrenaline, you're about to try to make your very first murder. Your first axe murder. And so, yeah, you're nervous and you miss. And so that could make sense too, why there were so many more blows at that point.
There's also a theory that Abby saw the person. So that could have been a defensive, like a reflex.
Right.
She turned her head.
Dodging it. Yeah. Yeah.
And could have all of this been intended to be the uncle or the brother-in-law, because he was the one staying in that room. So if someone was hiding in the closet, that was the room that he was staying in at the time, where he just happened to be like,
that's interesting.
Do we think that someone told him, like he was up to no good, nefarious activity, and someone was like, someone's after you, and that's why he like got lost for a long time, because he knew someone tipped him off that there was someone after him.
Yeah, it is a little suspicious that he quote unquote got lost in an area that he was familiar with. So
that's a good point, though, that it happened in the room he was supposed to be staying in. That is, I didn't consider that.
Yeah.
Right, because it's not like it was Abby's room or Andrew's room.
I don't know. I do think Lizzie might have done it. And like there's so much about the investigation and the case that is interesting to me, because like they found bloody clothes down in the basement that belonged to Lizzie, and she was like, period, and they just like dropped it and they were like, we're not going to touch this.
Menstrual
gross,
blood.
Ew. And then they never searched her bedroom because it was improper to do so. Like there are a lot of steps that they took.
There's a lot of conflicting reports. I just went through the entire court manuscript in this book here.
Oh my gosh, so cool.
Yeah, that took a long time. But they investigated her house her room like countless times.
Oh, they did.
But when they did go up there, she had the door locked. This was in the first walkthrough of the house, the police did. So her door was locked and they had to literally break the lock to get into the room, but they found nothing. So this is the tough part, is there is no evidence. So either Lizzie knew what the hell she was doing, or she had someone helping her out, which is kind of my theory there. It could have been the Reverend.
Like Bridget.
Could have been
the maid cleaning up.
I don't think the maid had anything to do with it. I really don't, because what's the motive? So some people they theorize that.
Well, okay, but here's the other thing. Andrew, there's a lot of speculation that Andrew was quite abusive, that he was sexually abusing both of his daughters. We know that he would lock Bridget away in her room. So who's to say that didn't extend to Bridget? So there's a lot of motive for all of them to try to be out of the house when Andrew's there, because they want to avoid him, to lock themselves away, to give less access to themselves.
Yeah.
Right.
And so if that is true, I understand both motive, and I also understand why they kind of skirted around the house and could have missed the murders, because, if he was around,
maybe
make yourself scarce.
They were definitely not agreeing with each other. And you see this with a lot of cases.
Right.
I think you saw the same thing in like the S.K. Pierce mansion, where after the death, now people are theorizing. A lot of it is based off psychics who come and be like, oh, and there was a lot of sexual assault that happened here. Kind of unfair to the dead. I mean, was there, and forgive me because I had heard this theory, but I didn't look into it. Is there evidence that any of that happened? Did Emma or Lizzie ever talk about that? Or is that just something that people theorize now?
I think it's just post hoc speculation, I believe.
Yeah. You can't rule it out, but it's
right.
Without any kind of evidence, or at least somebody admitting to that story, it seems almost a little unfair to the guy who just got hacked to death.
And it's hard because there's a lot of conversation about them and their, relationships and whatnot, because Lizzie specifically, like she was a lot older for the time to be unmarried, and so she was already kind of getting this reputation of being an old hag, basically.
Right.
32 in the 1800s is like, you might as well be in your 60s if you're single.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. So the other point that I think that gets overlooked, or just sort of gets, the point that she runs out 10 minutes after the death of her father And now someone sees her and she doesn't have any blood on her at this point in time, not in her hair, not on her face, not on her skin. Nobody notices any blood on her. So I don't think she actually did the deed, because how does she clean up in that amount of time? Even if
Right.
she
Especially
changes-
something so violent.
Right.
Well, and here's another thing. If the axe murders happened 90 minutes apart, or even 15 minutes apart, blood stains. So she would have had to clean herself up right after murdering Abby, wait for Andrew, then kill him, and then clean herself up again. Because otherwise, how do you have enough time to get out? Like, if you've ever... I don't know.
If you've
like
ever killed
cooked
anyone
meat or something, you know. Well, my dad's a hunter. Like, I've helped him take the guts out of deer before. Like, your hands stain. It gets in the beds of your nails. There's no way that she could have cleaned herself up to that extent within that short period of time if she had killed both of them in the way that that they died.
Yeah,
Right.
obviously the strongest case for Lizzie is that there's no blood splatter. The murder weapon probably was never found. So they had confiscated a hatchet that was in a box of hatchets down the basement. One of them, basically all of the hatchets were really dusty. They had confiscated one that looked like it was recently used, but they found no blood on it. And
Right.
later on, they would find, I think down the street on the roof of like someone's barn, some kids came across a hatchet, which appeared to have been bloody, but it was rusty. And so they think that might have been the murder weapon, but I don't think they know for sure. I don't think there was any DNA ever
Right.
found on that hatchet. So I don't think the
Right.
murder weapon was ever recovered. But in such a short period of time, for if Lizzie had done it, to cover everything up, to get rid of all of the evidence, to have absolutely no blood on her whatsoever. Now, maybe she did miss a piece, because there is the blue dress. You had mentioned it, that they had said maybe it was like period blood or something like that. And that's why
Yeah.
the police didn't touch it. I think, I don't know what the source is on that one. I think they would have confiscated it anyways.
Cooties,
Especially
bro.
if it was...
Cooties in the 1890s. Cooties in the 1890s.
Right. But the morning after the police notified Lizzie that she was the suspect and she was going to be investigated for the murders, her neighbor, Alice Russell, so she had gone into the kitchen and witnessed, and she testified to this in court, she witnessed Lizzie Borden tearing up the blue dress that she had seen her wearing the morning of the murders. And Lizzie explained that she was planning to burn it because it was covered in paint. And then she did burn it. So this is in the court transcripts. There's your bloody clothes. Lizzie burnt it in the kitchen furnace, but it was paint.
Wow.
The morning after she was told by police that she was going to be investigated as the top suspect for this crime, now she's in the kitchen tearing up and burning evidence.
Oh, well, I think I would too. A woman in the 1800s, you're already kind of this outcast in your society. How easy it will be for people to point fingers at you.
Yeah, especially when you have your bloody dress.
One thing, yeah, if there's this one thing that like it seems to you that they're going to use this against you, and there's no way, DNA evidence didn't exist at that time. There's no way
Right.
for them to test to see that it's your menstrual blood. Like, of course, I'd be like, oh my God, I need to get rid of this.
Yeah,
Right.
they also didn't even trust fingerprinting
Right.
as evidence at the time.
She also discovered the bodies. She could have gotten blood on her while she was discovering her father.
True.
Right.
Was she elbow drop him when she found him? Like
That's what you're supposed to do when you find a dead body, Jesse. We've
Okay.
gone over this.
yeah.
Well, it's not completely out of the realm of possibility that she found her father, didn't realize the severity of the injuries, and went to go see if he was okay. You could definitely it must have been an absolute bloodbath. So yeah, I could.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, and also in her defense as well, if she actually did kill both of them, wouldn't you think that she would have, instead of just saying, I just found my dad, she would have been like, oh my gosh, my stepmom and dad, I just found them both dead. When she ran out, she was only talking about her father, Andrew. She had no idea that Abby was dead upstairs.
Yeah, so her theory was, she told police that Abby had left the house. And what she had said was that that Abby had left a note for her saying that she was going to go. And police searched the house and they never found that note that she had said was left for her. So why even bring up that detail? Like, they're never going to find the note if it didn't exist. But there's so much strange behavior, and I get it. I mean, like, we've never been in that, or hopefully none of us have been in that position before, where
Sabrina.
yeah.
you know, that's a different position. But the changing of her story nonstop. There's a ton of there's a ton of circumstantial evidence that really makes people point fingers at her. For one, like right after she discovered her parents' body, she started sending all these people that came to help her. She started sending them away from the house on various errands so she could be alone in the house, which is extremely strange to do. Number one, because it makes it look like you're trying to clear out some evidence, possibly. Now, this is all circumstantial. You don't really know. But number two is if Lizzie thinks that there's an axe murderer who just came in and hacked half her family to death, why are you trying to be alone in your house? They might come back. Like, that seems like a very dangerous thing to do.
Yeah, but as a introvert and someone who likes to be alone in a very emotional moment like this, I imagine I would understand being like, can you please like let me have time by myself? Like, I'm overwhelmed by so much emotion. Like, can you help do these things and like stop bothering me?
Yeah, I can see it.
She's overwhelmed, overstimulated.
Right.
It makes sense.
Yeah. But I could see it your way too. I mean, this is why it's unsolved. This is why it's still a mystery.
Yeah.
One of the strongest points that the prosecution brought up was that Lizzie could have potentially been trying to poison her family before actually just deciding to kill them with an axe. And this was something that wasn't just a theory. The whole family was sick, except for Lizzie in the days leading up to the murder. But then they started to get better, and then boom, they all get killed with an axe. So,
But they were eating bad food. They had a perpetual stew of mutton on the stove for
Ew.
5 days or whatever it was that it was just there.
Okay, there we
and
go.
they were eating it. Like
that's a theory. But let me go through a little bit of other evidence that kind of might point this in a different direction. So in the trial, 3 different people testified to witnessing this. A druggist named Eli Bentz testified that Lizzie tried to buy prussic acid the day before the murders. So if you don't know what that is, it's also known as hydrogen cyanide, and it will is a rapidly acting and lethal poison that can affect humans and animals. So
Isn't it crazy how accessible all of that stuff was back then?
Well, that's the thing, is it actually wasn't accessible unless you had a prescription. So you could have a prescription.
But you could get a prescription.
Get a prescription
Okay, but
for
what was it
deadly
used
acid.
for other than poisoning?
It was used
So
for
why were
like
people using it?
you would
cleaning.
put it on clothing. Yeah, cleaning, but it could also she had said that she was going to put it around the edges of a sealskin sack
to
Whatever
kill
that is. I
moths.
think it's like
It
okay,
was
yeah.
an effective moth deterrent.
Common practice in the day.
Yes, but it's also at that time it was highly untraceable. So if you gave it in small enough doses, maybe to your maybe to your father and stepmother over a certain amount of time, then once they passed away from getting poisoned, at that time they couldn't really trace it. So Frederick E. Hart also saw Lizzie attempt to purchase the acid between 10 and 10:30 Wednesday morning. She was attempting to buy 10 cents of it to put around the edges of the sealskin sack. He positively ID'd Lizzie during the trial, and then so did Frank Kilroy, who was just a customer who was in the drugstore at the time. He heard the conversation, also positively ID'd Lizzie at the time. Now, maybe she was just trying to purchase this highly poisonous human-killing acid for moths or something, but she denied that she ever went into that drugstore. But they pinpointed her on the clothes she was wearing. They all had the same story. They pinpointed her by her voice. And then, So
okay, but so in the timeline of events, when did the family start getting sick versus when did she go in and attempt to purchase this?
So this happened the day before the murders. But my theory, and it is pretty much fact, my theory is she probably tried a different kind of poison in the weeks prior. And then she's like, all right, I need something more deadly. When she couldn't purchase that deadly potion, she's like, all right, fuck it, I'll use an axe. I think that's the timeline of events that I have there. And I think it's rock solid. Case closed. Let's talk about something else.
Obviously not rock solid. Family had food poisoning. They had bad swordfish one night, and then they had the bad perpetual stew the following several nights.
Yes, that's what you start with. You start with bad swordfish. You move on to perpetual stew. Then you move on to acid. Then you move on to hatchet. It's a perfect timeline. Everyone knows this.
Natural progression of events in the 1800s.
Yeah. Can you imagine eating 2-day-old swordfish that's been left out in August in New England?
Nope.
No.
Oh, God.
No.
No.
Seafood's got to be fresh or no
thanks.
deal.
Yeah, disgusting.
Perpetual Stew of Mutton is my next band name too, by the way.
It's a good one. Write that
That's a
down.
good one. Yeah.
One weird thing, Rob, you brought this up to me last week when we were talking about this case, and I looked into it because I thought it was super weird and interesting. She was charged with 3 counts of murder.
Yeah.
And I verified this because like that doesn't make any sense. So they charged her with murdering Abby. They charged her with murdering Andrew. And then the third charge was murdering Abby and Andrew. So like 3 counts of murder, one for a single homicide, another for a single homicide, and another for a double homicide, which
That's
is like,
wild.
that's
Imagine
insane.
you stole 2 cars. So like you stole the Honda, you stole the Toyota, and you stole the Honda and the Toyota.
It's like, couldn't they then?
But like, does this not only add to the fact that the community already kind of had a vendetta against her, that they really didn't like her, and so it was like any excuse to cause her more pain?
Yeah.
I think it was the contrary. I think there was a lot of mixed feelings about it, but I think because she was of higher society, this is why they're like, a woman couldn't have done this, and like a woman of high standards, she's not even Portuguese or Irish. Like obviously she didn't do this. Like this is what Fall River was like at the time.
So Fall River,
Right.
she was guilty in the court of public opinion in Fall River. The town of Fall River hated her and they wanted to see her hanged. But this was a nationwide case that made huge news all across the country.
Right.
And she was perceived as not guilty everywhere else in the country, but Fall River really wanted her blood.
Right. I mean, I get that. Like, if you live in the town where something horrendous happens and you do have knowledge of this family and the history of their relationships, I don't know. I feel like you would. It's also, I think sometimes it's easier. You want it to be someone you know rather than a random stranger. So that also would make the town double down on Lizzie.
Yeah. And you also want it solved, right? You want
Yeah.
that
Right.
security that terrible murderer has been caught, and now your blanket of safety is back.
I think
Yeah.
it goes back
Right. And the
to-
uncle doesn't live there. The parents are dead. Emma dies soon after. Like there's not.
Well, and
There's not
also
many people left.
Emma was an agoraphobe and like oddly out of town that during the murders.
Yeah, she was afraid to leave her house, but then left for like what, 5 days or something
Yeah,
like
so-
that at the time of the murders.
Which does make me think that if Lizzie did do it or had someone do it, that Emma did know about it, and Lizzie as like an older sister, despite their like, you know, fights that they would have as normal sisters do, she was like, I think you should leave. Like, I don't think you want to be here for this.
I think they were both in on it. I think Emma got out of town. I think Lizzie was kind of the mastermind behind the whole thing. They both had a feud with their father over money. Neither of them liked their stepmother. They hated her. And it grew to a time where, like, when they were young, they would call her mom, and then as they got older, they would refer to her by her first name, and then just like, oh, that is the woman who lived, that is my father's wife. Like, it just got worse and worse over time. I think it all comes back to the age-old thing of who is going to benefit from this crime. It's not going to be a stranger off the street. It's not going to be the uncle. It's not going to be the maid. None of them are getting a dime out of this. It comes down to the daughters, and I think that they had the motive. And if you just look at it on the face of it, well, who was the only, and they did get the inheritance. They went and bought Maplecroft with it. And then they lived there for 12 years together. So I think if Emma thought Lizzie was guilty, she never would have moved in with her, right? So they lived together for 12 years at Maplecroft before Emma moved to New Hampshire, and then never spoke to her again. So there was some sort of rift that formed. So I think it could have been one of two things. Either they were both in on it, they moved in together, they had some sort of disagreement, they moved out. Those things happen. Relationships fracture. Or Lizzie did it. Emma believed that Lizzie didn't do it. So they move in together. And then I think 12 years down the line, maybe something slips up and Emma starts to put the pieces of the puzzle together, but isn't going to rat out her sister to the police. And then that's why she moves off and never speaks to her again. That's the important detail, is that they never spoke again after they both left Maplecroft, or after Emma
This
left.
is why I
Could
wish
it be Emma?
I wish deathbed confessions were more of a thing. Like, I wish everyone had to.
something.
You had
like,
to
you have
spill
to.
your deepest secret as you were dying.
Yeah, but it makes me wonder too. Like, we're assuming that Emma discovered something nefarious about Lizzie, but could it have been the other way around, where Emma was just like completely cutting off Lizzie because she was so fearful that Lizzie would tell her secret,
Maybe
that she'll expose her plan, and so she's like, I'm just going to drop off the face of the earth. You're not going to see me. You're not going to hear from me.
Right.
I'm gone. I'm a ghost.
I think the truth is we'll get the answers when we're all dead.
Yeah,
hopefully.
I think so.
Yeah.
We're going to poke around. Our ghosts are going to Fall River to ask.
Yeah.
I also think that my next podcast is going to be called Deathbed Confessions, and what I do is I have people send in their deathbed confessions, and then I don't post it until after they die. So,
you have to track in
Yeah.
all the newspapers, all the obituaries.
Unfortunately, you
hilarious.
might drop an episode once every 4 years. You're really depending on these people to actually do this. But I
Then
would be
weirdly,
shocked.
they all weirdly, all those people end up dying, and we know who did it. So
Yeah, Sabrina.
Yeah. So suddenly it's a weekly podcast.
Yeah.
New episodes drop every Tuesday.
New bodies drop every Monday.
Yeah, I think it would be kind of a perfect crime for Emma. And we'll wrap up on this, I think, unless you have any other theories. But it would be kind of a perfect crime for Emma, where she has such a strong alibi. She left town for the whole week, had the killer come in and take care of business, and then her dumb sister is the only one left, and she's able to pin the whole thing on her.
Yeah.
And Lizzie's frazzled. Yeah. She's changing her story every 2 seconds. And maybe Emma set up these things to look like this. Because the other thing that came up in court was that same neighbor that found her burning the dress. Lizzie had told her the day before the murder, she's like, I think some man is going to come to the house and murder my dad. And she confessed that in court. Like, that sounds weird. Like she's setting up her story, right? So I don't know. I think it's...
Yeah. It's also hard because I feel like after learning so much about the witch trials and just how riled up people can be, and then they embellish their stories and everyone wants to contribute something, and then they just make up a bunch of stuff. It's like false confessions and eyewitness testimonies. Even today, there's so much that we're learning about them. And I can't imagine being on trial in that time period. And like, how are you going to... I just can't trust anything in this case.
Right.
Basically.
Proving things was a lot harder back then.
Yeah. You had absolutely shoddy police work. You had reporters tipping off stories early. So like everyone's in it for the money and the headlines. This is one of the first murder cases anyways, that made national news. So I don't think anybody knew how to handle the hype around it. But you're absolutely right. There's also like, maybe she's changing her story because she was flustered, and maybe she's nervous because she's like, all right, they're going to pin this on me whether I did it or not. So there is that possibility.
Yeah. If you're a part of high society, you're also trying to figure out what side of the case is the right side to be on, because you also have a reputation to uphold. And so I'm sure some of the people that came forward were motivated by that as well.
Sure. But then again, all the reports on her demeanor during the trial and during the investigation and everything was that she was way too calm, cool, and collected. So this idea of her
she's double dosed on morphine for 10 months. What do you want her to be?
Maybe I want to be double dosed on morphine.
Even to this day, like how someone is on trial, if they're too emotional, it's, oh, that means they're guilty. If they're too serious, that means they're guilty. And I feel like it's just...
They were going to tear apart either way.
Yeah. Right.
So you guys did get to investigate, as we talked about earlier. Was there any specific spirits that were involved in this that you thought might have been coming through more than others, or do you think
we had a lot, and I think Corinne kind of pointed this out earlier on, but each room was very different, and each part of the house is very different. So when we were in the basement, which is connected to, and you guys brought this up in your documentary in the beginning, Eliza Borden had tragically killed 2 of her children and taken her own life in the building connected to the Borden house. And it's believed that Eliza is trapped in the basement. And we did get a couple of like words coming through the, both like ghost tube and S-box saying trapped or help. And then there was like that dark, sinister Carl spirit who kept calling us sluts down in the basement.
Yeah.
So we
made a little bit of contact with Eliza, but there is this sort of...
who's Carl?
Oh, yeah. So there is this entity down in the basement who can move throughout the house, but primarily stays in the basement. The house, the tour guides have nicknamed him Carl. They say he's somewhere between being a demon and being a human spirit. So like we're not really sure exactly what he is. But he
probably
is
a manifestation of all the like dark energy that happened there.
Yeah, totally. But it's this like dark kind of demonic being. And we kept catching on the S-box like a shh, 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 and then the music box started going off. And the tour guide that was with us said the music box never went off in the way that it did when we were down there, which was basically insinuating that someone was standing in front of it the whole time, because it never went off. It never stopped going off.
Oh,
it was
so
just like, did he?
Yeah.
We had to turn it off because it was going too much.
Yeah,
yes.
We got that in
But then after
Lock Island,
10 minutes of us hearing it and getting scared and then it eventually getting turned off, whatever it was, which is presumed to be Carl, this like dark entity, probably got enough energy from our fear, because the on the S-box turned into sluts, sluts, sluts. And then throughout the house, when we'd move about, specifically on the 3rd floor, when we were up there communicating with the kids, which was so nice.
Which is
they were like,
the most beautiful
"Are you guys
experience.
friends? I like to cuddle. Will you stay with me?" there was a lot of fun and playtime, and then all of a sudden it turned, and then the kids said, like, to your right, don't go over there, and then all of a sudden we start getting sluts. So like Carl had found us in the house.
Carl came upstairs.
He followed us up.
It's terrifying. Yeah, I thought with the interaction with the kids, I think one of you had taken out a toy horse or something along those lines, and the kids were like, the communication was it's walking or something along those lines, and I was like, wow, that is like crazy.
And you were reading Goodnight Moon, and the S-Box interrupted right before you were about to say good night, like one of the lines. And the S-Box said good, or we caught the EVP saying good. And then you said, yes, it is good.
Yeah.
Good night. And then
like,
they was, oh, sorry. Like they interrupted the story.
It was really, really sweet. And like we said, everything, like communication really changed throughout the house. And going up there, it like the energy changed, and it truly felt like these kids were so excited to like have, because at first they were timid. Like they definitely weren't sure, what was our intention? What were we doing there? What did we want from them? But then I think once they realized we just genuinely wanted to play with them and read them books and play with their toys, they started becoming more active, and it was like really, really heartwarming.
And it was almost immediate too, because there was a point where they asked, are you a friend? And we said, yes, we are a friend. And immediately the S-Box starts going off, and then they're playing with us. They're interacting with the toys. They're
I think
having all of our equipment go off.
I think your approach to dealing with the children was very human. And you see this so many times in paranormal investigations where adults will come in and they're like, all right, this is the room where the kid was. And they'll immediately start off with like, were you chained to the radiator? It's like, it's not how kids want to have a conversation with you. It's so I thought the way that you approached it was really good. It was really authentic.
Well, thank you. And I think that's our approach to paranormal investigation generally, because we unfortunately are hindered in like the ability to see spirits or really know what's going on there. So we kind of like to let them come to us and share their experience in the way that they want to. And it's a very respectful conversation.
Yeah. And we set it up in every room. Like we introduce ourselves, we explain our intention, and basically are just like, you're a willing participant. We can't force you to do anything. We're not here to elicit some sort of negative emotion out of you. We just have these pieces of equipment. We usually explain what they all are, how to use them. And then honestly, it's worked quite well for us. We tend to get a lot of activity out of a lot of places, which we feel fortunate to have
I think that's the way to do it. We try to.
I do think Andrew did get annoyed by us. Like he was
pretty annoyed.
Be quiet.
Did he punch you in the back?
Luckily, no.
There was some name calling though, for sure. He did not want us to be. He primarily stayed in the room that he was killed in, though. We mostly got EVPs that seemed to be from Andrew there.
Yeah.
Have you?
But it was interesting because we did have a couple moments where we heard a woman speak. Elena had seen someone peek out from behind a door at one point. So we did see some like physical and voice manifestations beyond just the equipment that we had brought with us. So that was really interesting. But I think by far the most interesting part of the night for me was that when we decided at 4:30 a.m. that we would leave, it was like the house decided that they could stop performing. It was like, whew, okay, we're done. Because the whole house got bright. It was like all the lights turned on. They got really, really light. Suddenly we felt really comfortable.
Us out.
Yeah, it was like they were pushing us out. Like, okay, time to leave, girls.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you had brought it up on your show like that. It was almost the idea of maybe houses as haunted as this one, they overperform to get you freaked out, so they get you to leave.
Right.
And I think that's an interesting theory. And you do kind of notice that. The only house that was kind of the opposite for me was the Conjuring house. And that was when all of us were in there, it was kind of fun. And then when I went back in all by myself, I was like, oh, now it's absolutely terrifying. And it might have just been because I was by myself or because it was like 5 a.m. I thought.
It's because you're not brave. It's because you're just not brave. What was
I think any haunted house by yourself is going to be scary because you're scaring yourself. And I think that's a big point where it's like the energy you bring in is kind of what the house is going to reflect.
Yeah. What was scary at 4:30 in the morning, being inside the Lizzie Borden house or being on the streets of Fall River?
Yeah.
You know, I want to say Fall River, but I don't want to the Fall River residents.
Yeah, we were quick to get out.
Yeah, we were. We ran into the parking lot.
Definitely.
We definitely did scare the food delivery guy, which I thought was hilarious. Like he came to the front door and was like, what?
Yeah, I don't know how many DoorDash orders
are getting
sent
there.
To Lizzie Borden House.
You guys blew it. You should have answered the door holding an axe. Is what you should.
Oh man, next time.
He was scared enough. I don't think he would have survived that.
That's the way to do it. So the Bordens are also supposed to. We're just gonna rapid fire through these real quick. They're also supposed to haunt the Oak Grove Cemetery, which is an insanely large cemetery, and the amount of hauntings that could be happening there is just like endless.
Yeah,
True. But
I think the same thing could be true with a lot of these places where if somebody sees a veiled woman or they see a shadow figure in the cemetery where Lizzie Borden is, they immediately say, oh, that's the ghost of Lizzie Borden, when it could be any of the other 55,000 souls that are buried there.
Yeah.
right.
So you get that. You also get that, like Dave mentioned in the opening, with the Lizzie Borden house, where someone saw this shadow figure creeping up the stairs and they assumed it was the ghost of Lizzie Borden when it could have been either of the other two. Also, she didn't die there. Not that means she can't be haunting there, but I think people are quick to equate a ghost to a celebrity.
Of course.
In all of our investigation, we felt like we communicated with the children, with Eliza, with Abby, with Andrew, but we never ever felt like we were getting contact from Lizzie.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't even think Lizzie's ghost haunts that location.
Right.
That's kind of like
I am curious though, if when Lizzie lived there, if she experienced the ghost kids at all.
Oh,
right, because they died 40 years prior.
That's a good question.
Right.
Oh, we have another suspect. Could have been the ghost kids.
The ghost kids.
I have a quick theory on the ghost kids there. So if you look at pictures of the house from back in the day,
We have to stop calling them ghost kids, though. They're the children of the well. That is such a more awesome name.
that is a great name.
So much creepier.
So sad.
Children
Very
of the
sad.
well. The house that they lived in has been significantly renovated. It doesn't look anything like the house looked in the 1800s. So I wonder if they've sort of moved over to that house because it's sort of maintained the way it's looked for all these years.
Yeah, something familiar.
Yeah, something familiar. So I wonder if that's why they are haunting that particular location.
Yeah, I think it's possible they could go back and forth because the basement of what is now the coffee shop, that is still exactly the way it was at the time. Now they've covered up the well. It's now a cement floor. But the doctor's office, which is right next door to where the children died, that's still exactly like it was with a lot of the same furnishings and everything. So a lot of that's familiar, but is that where you're going to want to hang out as a ghost? No, go next door where they have toys.
I'd much rather go to the third floor where the owners have put out toys for me.
Right.
Yeah.
And,
exactly.
And as we said, it's more likely that Elizabeth is haunting Maplecroft, where she actually enjoyed her time, had parties.
Right.
Probably a lot of residual hauntings, I would assume, with her there.
It's also where she died.
Definitely.
So they don't know where exactly in the house she died. Probably one of her bedrooms, but I guess she had two different bedrooms, so they don't really know where. And then it's also possible that it's haunted by the Silva family as well, which I believe the father or the grandfather passed away inside the house, potentially in the same room, but we don't know. And then you've had multiple investigations there. I thought the Kindred Spirit episode was pretty interesting. Their approach to investigating that house was I thought pretty solid. So they had first gone in and they were getting some stuff, but it seemed hostile. So what they did was they took out every single mention of the murders, any kind of memorabilia about the Borden House murders, any newspaper clippings. They literally removed all of that stuff from the house and then stopped calling the ghost Lizzie. They started referring to her as Lisbeth, which she liked to be called later in life. And then they started getting positive communication with what they believed was Lizzie's ghost. So an interesting approch, kind of a respectful approach.
It's about the energy and respect that you bring into a place.
Yeah.
Were you all aware, was everyone here aware that her birth name was Lizzie and not like Elizabeth or anything like that?
That's crazy.
I was not.
I thought that was
That's
specifically to my friend, well, we call him Buddha, but on his driver's license and on his birth certificate, his name is Bobby. I'm like, what? That's crazy. I've never seen that before. Your actual name is Bobby. It's not Robert.
So the way I figured this out was the worst way to figure this out. And we got to start winding this down. But the Sarah Cornell case, which we'll just we'll disregard for the haunting portion of this, but I was trying to make sure that the three Borden women that were the ones who looked over her body to give the testimony on the injuries were connected, because no one's ever connected them. And I wanted to, put my stamp on like, Rob discovered this because he's the best type of deal. And I found a book that was 450 pages long of just the ancestry of the Borden family that dates back to the 1500s for when they went to Fall River. And I found Lizzie and Emma's name in the book. They're 9th generations of the Bordens that came over on a ship.
Damn.
And she was literally born Lizzie. Could I have looked up her birth certificate and saved myself 3.5 hours? Yes. But that's how
I mean, that's a cool book to discover.
Yeah.
What was the
I
result?
wish every family had that.
Did you connect the Bordens to the Bordens?
Oh, I did. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's the important part. You might want to mention that. All right.
So I did. I think that the 3 Borden women were around 7th generation from the Richard and Joan Borden, who came over in the early 1600s. And it gets really split, though, because those 2 had 8 sons and 5 daughters. And then each of those 8 sons and 5 daughters had like 13 to 15 kids each. So the Bordens are just scattered around.
Huge,
Fall River.
That's wild.
Yeah. So,
Well, we got to get you guys out of here. But before we do that, I just wanted to show. I do actually have a photo of the killer, and I think that we should. It's here. It's
Lizzie Borden.
It's Lizzie Borden.
Oh my God.
Where did you find that?
He drew it by hand. It took him all week.
Is this where the nursery rhyme with the ketchup comes in?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. See, full circle.
That's actually the only reason we brought you in, was to bring in the hot dog joke and the ketchup joke.
We love a good hot dog joke.
We do, yeah.
And in fact, you brought up New Orleans earlier, and we did capture possibly the only photo of a ghost penis when we were in New Orleans.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
I'm going to have to look at that for a long time.
That was
You can
probably
analyze
look at it in
it.
private.
it's probably just a guy on the streets that was.
We saw plenty of those too.
Yeah, there were a lot of that. That's New Orleans.
New Orleans is an interesting place.
Have you guys done the Hinsdale house yet?
We've covered it, but we haven't
We've
been.
physically been.
So the one suggestion I will give you for places to go investigate, I've never been so terrified as I have been at a place as going to the Hinsdale house.
That makes me so excited.
That's where you did the music box, right?
It is.
We've done it there and a few other places, but yeah, the Hinsdale house.
Texted myself.
Yeah.
So what I will tell you guys, when we went to the Hinsdale house, like I usually get these like feelings in certain rooms. Like I said, the Oliver house, I got it at the Lizzie Borden house. The Hinsdale house is the only place that I've ever just got onto the property and had that feeling the entire time we were there. It's very creepy, but yeah, I would highly suggest going there.
Corinne's nervous and
I'm
I'm
already
excited.
nervous. Yeah, I'm like
It's a scary
quivering in my chair.
We'll say don't expect to have any success door dashing to the Hinsdale house, though.
No.
We'll bring our own
Bring a
snacks.
lunch.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for having us.
Yes. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, once again, that's Two Girls, One Ghost. You can find all their links below. Check out their show. It's very well done. Absolute pleasure. Thank you all so much for coming on.
Yeah, thank you.
And if you ever want to do an overnight at the Lizzie Borden house, let us know.
Yeah.
We're gonna. We definitely plan to. So we'll be in talks.
Yeah, we'll let you know because we want to do it and we kind of want to do it soon. So we'll let you guys know.
Amazing.
Cool.
Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, appreciate it. Was it?
Bye.
All right, and I think that'll pretty much do it. We covered pretty much everything there. We will be back for part 2 once we do an investigation inside the house. But for now, that is the extensive history of the Lizzie Borden case. Let us know what you think. Who is guilty?
Sabrina.
Could have been Sabrina.
It was Lizzie Borden. I'm sticking to it.
Lizzie Borden. I like it.
I do want to give a quick shout out to Joe and his son Joe, the owners of the coffee shop next door, Miss Lizzie's. They gave me a free tour of that place and the paranormal history there and the history of Eliza Borden and whatnot. So that was pretty cool. And they have good coffee there. So check them out.
They do. Then they give me a shorter tour and then Rob the shortest tour.
Yeah,
Yes.
Because we all showed up at different times, but they
did the tour 3 times.
But cool spot. Might actually end up doing a little investigation there. We'll see. We'll see if it's in the cards. The Children of the Well. That's a good band name too.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Not bad.
Yeah.
Not bad. Except when they find out it's a bunch of 40-year-old dudes.
Speaking of good names, let's get into some Patreon names.
All right, let's thank our RIP of the week, Kathy F. And let's also hop into our VIPs here, which are very special people. Let's start with Ryan F, Justin W, J Gooch 725, Jennifer A, Jeremy M, Casey W, Brandina 77, Kathy F, Kitten Clown Dozer, Ghost Nurse, JP, Another Vice, Dave has a new kangaroo onesie with a bottom flap, West Virginia Coal Miner, Tess, Edgar Allan Poe whipping shitties in the snow, Kate and Steve M, Sharon V, Glitter Tees Cameron from Washington, Kelly C, Jennifer P, Nick, Liz Young, Donnie N, Inspires Gaming, Allison V, Robert H, Anna C, Jeannie, Mom and Pops W, Father Squatch the Elder, Lisa J, and more disappointing than Plymouth Rock. Thank you so much for being VIPs. Next up,
what's more disappointing? It just says more disappointing than Plymouth Rock. Are they just saying themselves, or is the show more disappointing than Plymouth Rock? Because that's painful.
Possibly. We don't know. Into the Warren's words, we have angelic insanity. Dave's soul shall find itself alone.
I agree.
Damn.
Degenerate gambler, voodoo ghost who shouldn't have hit on 19. Jamie E, Nick M, T-Cat, Whisper. Jeremy M, Beth C, Rachel G, Sarah B, Her Lady Spook Ship, Slosh to Noshgosh, Morgan S, Julie Gooley, Eugene M, educational tip from trucker Colby. Logs haven't been hauled on flatbed since the 50s.
I disagree. I see it daily.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know.
I think I'd seen a couple. I don't know if it's on flatbeds, but yeah.
Yeah,
I literally took a picture one like a couple weeks ago and put it in Discord.
No,
so,
I don't think they're flatbeds. I think that they have like side racks. The problem with this truck was that they were ratchet strapped down on a flatbed, which I guess would be pretty preposterous because they rolled off the side of the truck.
Right.
Sure.
Glad we got
historical event. Analyzed by Dave. Kath Q, Chris Connolly, LBPS founder, next HTGS guest, the other Rachel B, Sarah Cook, Zeta Chimera, Janice G, Lily, Anthony T from the 603. Ohio is the greatest state.
Incorrect.
This little devil went down to Georgia. I became insane with long intervals of horrible sanity. And Seth on guitar. Thank you so much for being part of the Warren's Words. And finally, we will hop into the Ghost Pirate Mafia. Cole to the miscellany. Miscellany, a word that I don't know. Miscellany. There's only so many ways to say this. I got it right twice. We have Geo. No, it's not miscellaneous. It's miscellany. Miscellany. Show's too long for me to keep trying this. Cora H, Grim B, D, the Lobster Dancing Banana Land Dinosaur Monster, Sarah C, I'm sorry, that's Susan C, Just Ghoulie, Witchy Kitty 416, Karen L, Michael M, Amber R, Brant C, Mrs. Nardozzi, Shane O'Mac, Joe, Trevor S, Christina S, Kate C, Kelly C, Bloop. Crazy Legs, Cowboys, the worst franchise ever. Mother McTibbles tucking her herd of ghost children into Rob's bed. Sweet dreams, Rob. Miss Macabre, Michelle, Nuroku, Cold Warrior. There is a baby, Youngstown Pizza on the way. D from H-Town, Meta A, Monster Mom 04, Wicked Alley, Dark Snark. Do you eat cheeseburgers with or without the paper skin?
What?
Mm-hmm. With. I think that's the paper that they used to divide the burgers, maybe?
Yeah.
Yeah, with, of course. That's the cheese. Megan S., Arcade Hunters, Wayne C. If vegetarians get in an argument, is it a beef? Crystal Quinn, a.k.a. not a Rob fan. Thick Boy Freddy's baby mama was definitely yeeted. Alicia E. Thick Boy Freddy commanding the queen herself to, hey Siri, pour cold soup on Rob's toes and make him squish them in a puddle.
Hey, whatever
When
just
Edgar
happened
Allan,
there.
Yeah. When Edgar will only help for something in return, it's quid pro quo. Sam from Nepal, Joe, I love a good solid deck, say in Kiwi accent R. I knew what you're trying to get me to say. I'm not going to do that. Al Capone, Huggy Bear, coming soon. The Ryman Auditorium, presented by Dave.
Dave.
You have a new location there. Solar Flare. Mariah M, the new assignment. Yeah. Kiralee J, Rachel B, Cody G, Hooply Whooply, Birthday Witch, and Edgar Allan Ho. Thank you so much for being part of Patreon. Captain McSlugs, please change your name. And that'll do it. Goodbye.
Peace.